Man, something happened this week that made me think one thing. Do we have judgmental substitute teachers?
Substitute Teachers Lounge.
All right, here's what I want you to think about. First of all, I made it sound like being judgmental is a bad thing. Is it always a bad thing? Or are substitute teachers sometimes allowed to be judgmental? In fact, if you wanted to get overly philosophical, you could say that's teachers and substitute teachers' jobs to be judgmental, to evaluate, but that's not really the same thing. So let me tell you what happened. And I know there's a lot of teachers that listen to this podcast from the school I work. This didn't happen at the school, but it reminded me of things that have happened to me at schools in the past. So the Substitute Teachers Group Facebook page, I hate to hit on that 2 weeks in a row, and this story's not going to be too long. I just want to tell you what happened. I told you last week, in fact, last week's episode, guys, if I always compare the first 7 days of every episode, because that's where the meat of it is. That's where you get the majority, not always the majority, but usually the majority of your listens. So I compare each episode's first 7 days. Last week's was the most popular one we've had in about 6 months, just less than 6 months, so you all really like that topic. So with that in mind, I told you that I've had people contact me on the Substitute Teachers Lounge Facebook group through a message, through a private message, which is the way to do it. They said, I'm leaving because of this person. In effect, they were judging that person. It wasn't someone they like to deal with. And I asked them, I said, have they slandered you? Or have they just strongly disagreed with you? I never heard back from them. I assume they left. They might not even be listening to this now. But that was the way to handle it from both of our sides. The person handled it correctly. They did it privately. And then I feel like for my website, my page, the way I want it to be, I handled it correctly. Was this week, we had a more judgmental person that basically just made a post that said, it didn't say exactly this, but this is what was implied. You need to get rid of this poster. And they posted that publicly. Now, I don't know if they did it accidentally. I think they did it on purpose to try to get people fired up that agree with them. And again, I'm not going to kick out anybody just because they strongly express their opinion. That person in my book was judgmental. I've warned them about being judgmental. This is a Substitute Teachers Lounge group page is a page where you can disagree. I want you to disagree because if we all agreed with everything, we no longer have anything to talk about. We can disagree about things. It's okay. This person put me on the spot. You do something about this. Well, I'll be honest. My judgmental response, that person is no longer a part of our page, no longer a part of our Substitute Teachers Lounge group because it's my group. I'm not selfish, but it's my group. I want it to go by my rules. And if you put me in a spot because you disagree with that, well, you need to go elsewhere, and I'm going to help you do that. So I removed that person from the group, and obviously I removed that post. I do not being judgmental. Now, I don't want to offend those of you that in a religious way, but me and my preacher friend, we talk about it on our other podcasts quite often, Church Debater and Preacher Mike, about not being judgmental. I want to talk about the substitute teacher today, though. I don't like the word judgmental. If you just look at the definition, when it's used that way. Now, judge is the root word, of course, but that's not necessarily a negative word. But once you use the phrase judgmental, the chief definition is having or displaying an excessively critical point of view. You're being judgmental of others. Let me set your mind for a moment, and my mind as well. Do we, the instant we meet someone, teacher, student, whoever, judge them? We do. We run into as a substitute teacher, we run into new teachers all the time. We compare ourselves with other substitute teachers all the time, and we judge them. We probably judge them to try to make ourselves feel better, feel superior, or at least feel like we're better than that other person as a substitute teacher. Do I ever have students come up to me and say, "You're my favorite substitute teacher"? I do. It's not all of them, though. I've got a pretty good feeling that there's probably some of them out there that maybe don't like me as a substitute teacher. There's some of them out there that like other substitute teachers more. Do I put on my judgmental hat when that happens? Let's talk first of all about teachers and substitute teachers being judgmental of each other. I don't have a whole lot of examples to share with you. It's more, now, I hate to say this again. You all know that I worked 38 years as an accountant, and I'm sometimes very critical of that profession in general. I don't mean to be. It's just from my viewpoint, but I think that is a industry, I guess that should have been an industry, that is very critical, is very judgmental of each other. There are some good ones out there. There are some cutthroat accountants out there. That is a judgmental profession. Maybe sometimes on a car lot, as the salesperson walks up, they might judge the person based on their clothing, based on their conversation, as to what am I going to try and sell that person today. Should I go with the most expensive because I've judged them and I feel like they can afford it? Or do I just go ahead and knock down a couple of notches because I don't really think these people can afford the first car that I would otherwise suggest to them? So now let's take that to the school system. When you meet a teacher in the hallway, you are going to judge them. You can't help it. You can't help it. It's just natural. It's really what you do after that. Judgment is basically figuring out a way to feel like we're better than the people we're judging. That's it. So here's what I've seen in schools. I sometimes will see it among teachers. Now, that's the minority. It's not very often that I see this, but I know I will overhear teachers. I guess I'm a talkative person. I tend to be a social person. So people talk to me all the time, whether it's adults or students. I once made the comment to some students that, these teachers have this conversation with me, I guess because I try to treat everyone equally and try to be a pleasant person to have conversations with. I joke around to the point of sarcasm sometimes, so I hope I don't go too far with my humor at times. But I will hear teachers being judgmental of other teachers because of maybe their teacher methods, because of maybe their personal lives that they let trickle into their school life. Maybe there's something going on at school that they don't feel the other teacher participates as much as they do, so they are judgmental of them. They don't really know why they don't participate. They don't really have any idea what that person has going on in their life. They just are judgmental. There's some people that, for instance, let me give you this because I fall into this category. There are some people that don't like to have after school duty, like watching the buses until the kids leave. They want to go on home. They want to get on with their lives. And then there are some people that don't like having morning duty, being there when the students get there because they are not an early person, but yet they sometimes get assigned to them. Then they just start automatically judging other teachers because they never have to work those times. I fall into that category. I am an early riser. I have been for all of my life. Even since I've been retired and on weekends, I rarely can ever sleep past 5 a.m. So I get into the schools about 7 a.m. In the evening, I referee volleyball most nights, so I want to book it out of there as soon as school is over. So if somebody, a substitute or a teacher, wanted to think they are better than me, they could watch me leave right at 3 o'clock most every day and say, well, he's not very dedicated. He doesn't stick around very long. Well, what they don't see is me getting there maybe 45 minutes before they show up in the morning. I could judge them for doing that. I choose not to. But that's why we have to be careful about that. Now, think about it. I'm going to let you get by with a little judgment in your mind. But let's think now. Do we ever let our students hear us talking about being judgmental of other teachers? Guys, I'm telling you, I don't care how much you say, now guys, don't say anything, but they're going to talk about that. You might actually be joking around and they take it seriously, but if you start judging negatively, I should say, some teachers that you have been long-term for, from some other substitute teachers that you have run into, well, those students are going to share those stories, so be careful. Now, here's the way it's proper to judge other teachers. I wouldn't say anything to them unless they ask for it. Maybe they say, how do you feel about the way I handled this? What do you do when this comes up? Maybe that would be okay. But don't judge outright. Judge in your mind in this way. Okay, I see what this teacher has done. It's not going over well. I don't think I will ever use that in my classroom because I see the results. Now, I hate to be like this because I have had, it's not so much where I am now, but I have had students come up to me and say, Mr. Collins, I just don't like this teacher, because they tell me because I've substituted for them before. I just don't like this teacher. This is what they say about me. This is how they treat me in class. I don't know why I got on their bad list, but there's no way to get off of it. That immediately puts a judgmental mentality into my mind about that teacher. Now, do I march right over and say something to that teacher? Of course not. But I'm telling you, make sure you make school for the students and not for the teachers and the substitute teachers. Do it in such a way that those students aren't going to judge you. Do it in such a way that it's going to make your work at that school a lot more fun. And by all means, do it in such a way that you look at the other teachers. I'm going to give you permission to judge those other teachers in this way. I didn't say being judgmental. I actually said judge. Judgmental is always negative. Judging is not. Every teacher you run into, the things you don't like about their teaching, you'll find a few. Don't do those. Look especially for the pieces that you like, man. When we did this, it went over so well. Pick up ideas from them, but please don't be judgmental. Don't let that show, okay? Unfortunately, we're all human and it happens, but try not to let that show to others. Now, that's going to make you a better substitute teacher. if you don't insist that you're better than everybody else and instead you give everybody credit for the great things that they do and that you're not judgmental of them. Now, let's spend the last part of our show on how often are we judgmental of students. Let me start off with this phrase, and I'll be shocked if you have never heard it said before. Have you ever heard someone say, that student will never amount to anything? You know you've heard that. There's an old classic story. I hate to repeat it because it's been repeated over and over, but I think it's a great story. I think this was actually in a college setting because they wanted to handle this like research, but I'm going to kind of adapt the story a little bit because, to be honest, I don't remember all the details. I just remember the gist of it, but that's going to be okay for our purposes. There was a new teacher, professor, or something like that hired to teach at this school. They started them out with just 2 sessions. They were about 30 students in each session. They told the professor that this first group, they're high achievers. You won't have any trouble with them. Second group, they said just the opposite. These students really struggle. So they sent that professor into that. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time saying professor. Maybe I should just say teacher. But they sent the teacher into that environment. Now, you know for a fact that that teacher couldn't help but already judge those students. The teacher would know walking into the first that they were overachievers, the second group were underachievers. But I think most of you know the story, so I won't oversimplify it, but I'll just mention to you as a reminder that it was just research. There were no overachievers. There were no underachievers. They were pretty much just 2 groups of 30 students each that were a blend of students just like every other class you've ever had in their life. But since that teacher went in, the teacher better respected the first class, those students got higher grades. They didn't quite respect as much the second class, those students didn't get as high a grade. They were both groups were the same blend of students. But because that person had that judgmental thought in his mind now because of what they had been told, they looked at those students differently. Let's remember this. We have, I will, just about every long-term role I've had, this doesn't happen as much. Well, I guess it does now that I think about it. Sometimes when you have a daily role, a daily substitute teacher job, you may be told about those students because, they're doing it. Administration is telling you that because they think you might need to know that knowledge. You've got some students in here that sometimes give teachers trouble. You have some students in here that sometimes give the teachers trouble. Now, there have on occasion, I've been told about classes that are giving the teacher trouble, and I came out of the meeting thinking, man, what is going to happen when that class comes into class? Well, it was unusual because, I've had some classes that, to be honest, I didn't particularly care going into the classroom for that period because I wasn't looking forward to having to deal with a couple of the students, and they were defiant. I don't get that very often, but I get it on occasion. But I have been told in the past about a class that the teacher has struggled with, and then when they got in, I would classify them more as rowdy than defiant. In fact, I didn't think they were defiant at all. Interestingly enough, I had that conversation with another student who I've known all their life because they go to church with me. And they disagreed with me in this regard. They did think they were defiant. Now, I guess it's because I never go into the classroom with a chip on my shoulder. It takes a lot to upset me in a classroom. I try to be sympathetic towards the kids' lives, towards what they've gone through, or maybe just what they've gone through in the previous 24 hours, and realize it's okay to have a bad day every day. Now, regardless of that, even though I didn't classify them as defiant, I might have classified them as rowdy, and even that has to be dealt with. But you have to, you have to deal with it, or in other words, they might be too distracting to the other students who aren't acting that way. But still, we don't have to look at them in a judgmental way. I'll use my old referee example. I do not like referees telling me when I go to a match that with a team that I've never had before. Now, but the referee has had them. I will occasionally hear a referee say, all right, now this player, you need to watch for this. And I'll tell them, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to watch for a particular player expecting them to make a mistake. That's going to put me in a judgmental frame of mind. I would rather just watch things as they happen, and if a mistake is made, I do not want to go to any school situation and ever talk about teachers that there's no teachers I don't like, but I don't want to hear other teachers talk about teachers they don't like. I think that's a judgmental attitude. You are going to do your best job as a substitute teacher if you practice this. Get out of the habit of as soon as you meet a teacher, as soon as you meet a student, that you make a judgment on them. Give everyone the benefit of the doubt, even though it may have been negative when you first met them. Some people I met for the first time, it was a negative meeting. Some of them went on to be people that I trust entirely and ask advice of all the time. It's just weird when you get to know them, how much different things are. I won't bore you again about the number of student stories I have shared that were where the student was negative at first, and now they're some of the most positive students I ever run into, some of the most helpful students I ever run into. I won't tell the specifics, but they're all over the place. If you judge a student right off the bat and immediately say, I'm not going to give this student any help because they're not going to get any better, well, then if they don't get any better, it's on you because you treated them that way. So every situation you run into these days, if you meet a teacher that rubbed you a little bit the wrong way the first time you met them, make sure you talk to them again the next day and the next day. Get to know them, and you'll find great things about them. When you have a student in your room for the first time and it does not go well, keep trying, keep trying. One student that I had a negative encounter with at first, they apologized to me later. They saw how the other students enjoyed having me in the room, and they decided they enjoyed having me too. And now we get along great. Do they still have their moments? Of course they do, but don't walk into a school situation or doggone it, any situation with a judgmental attitude, because it's not going to be productive for you, the teacher, or the student.